Alright, so I'm going to attempt to do a sort of reflections on and thoughts/opinions on capitalism. Now, really I should entirely hate capitalism, considering that I used to be an anarchist and, well, considering that I'm friends with so many socialists, left-wingers, hippies and bloody punks, I should just despise capitalists entirely and the idea of capitalism. But I don't completely despise capitalism. I don't agree with it either. Do not get me twisted there. But I don't necessarily entirely disagree. I don't think it's always bad, and I don't think it always was a bad thing. So for those of you who don't know what capitalism is, it's an economic system and kind of like a means of production in which the means of production and, you know, service sectors and different industries and, yeah, just all means of production and service sectors and different trade industries and such are basically mainly or completely privately owned, so not state owned. So like random people own those services rather than in socialism where the state basically owns and runs it all, or everyone collectively runs it all. The idea is that everything's privatized under capitalism. So like healthcare will be privatized to the most, well, to whatever company. And the arguments for it are that if you privatize it to the best and most efficient companies, because they're working in terms of a business and they're about efficiency and making the most money out of it and having the best product, the quality of the product should be better because it's a competitive market. You know, they have to be better than other service providers. Otherwise, you know, they'll die. People won't buy from them. People won't bother. So their company will just die off. For example, the idea is that the best corporation, the most effective corporation with the best products would run the hospitals, because if the hospitals were substandard, people would kick off. Now, the arguments against this are that once a corporation or a capitalist company has a monopoly on an industry, say for example, I owned 100% of all of the hospitals in the UK, the argument is that there's no space for anyone else to encroach on that territory. There's no form of competition because I own it all. Nobody else will have the capital to fund that kind of business. Nobody else will have the connections within those type of industries, the connections with service providers who buy and sell goods. And even if they do, the other service providers will know, because they're a smaller company, that if we cut them off from their production, if we say, well, you know, we can buy 15 billion of grams of X chemical off you, or, you know, you could sell 15 million to this new company and we'll cut you off entirely. Essentially, you own that market, you have the monopoly on that market, which is the argument against capitalism, because once someone has a monopoly, it doesn't matter how effective they are, because essentially they own the damn market. They can be as ineffective as they want. So that's kind of the argument against capitalism, and also the idea that because it promotes wage labour and capital accumulation, if there's no welfare system, or if the wages are too low, you can't get out of that. For example, if you have to work 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, there's the argument that you don't have enough time to cook and feed yourself, and if all that money goes into you staying alive rather than living life, or most of it goes into you staying alive and a bit goes into your leisure activity, there's no room to acquire capital, because the system of capitalism, the other corporations around you, have the monopoly on your life, essentially. So those are the arguments against capitalism, which is where I was against capitalism, essentially. Although it kind of came out of mercantilism, in a sense of ideas of like, we'll trade for this price, we'll trade for that price. You know, back in the days when you couldn't really have gigantic corporations because there wasn't the mean of transport to set them up, and there wasn't like electronic systems to store information about who owned something. There wasn't a stock market as such. You know, just paper-based documents and trade. That was mercantilism essentially. You know, people bartering on the streets, people buying and selling, and capitalism is like a more organised, larger form of mercantilism. In a way, it's like we'll set these prices at this, and we'll trade on a larger scale rather than a local economy. It's a worldwide economy under capitalism. The pros of capitalism are that if it's working and it's working well, for example, if you can keep a welfare state, you'll keep everyone in your nations alive, whether they have a good or bad life is, you know, it's not irrelevant. It's a different ethical argument, but you could hypothetically keep people alive if your welfare system worked and wasn't too bureaucratic, as I would say it is in the UK. And that because you have large companies that, you know, have millions and millions of employees and tons of factories and can get the most efficient means of access to resources and mass produce stuff, you can make stuff more quickly and more effectively. Where people think it fails, where the cons are that there's an idea that the global corporations will take over, and once they've got the monopoly, it's irrelevant what they do. Class warfare, you know, that kind of thing. For me, I'm still not convinced that capitalism is the way forward anymore. Mainly because, for me, it's a boring system. Like, you sold this idea that you work and you live and you work 40 hours a week and you live in your comfortable home and you get your wife, or now that it's acceptable to be homosexual, you get your husband if you're a man, or whatever the fuck, right? And you live your life, you have your kids, and you have a few nice things, and you slowly get a house on, you maybe get a house for your kids, and this, that, and the other, and then you die. To me, that's fucking boring. I mean, you put 40 hours a week for the whole of your life into all of this stuff, into one other person that you then have to settle with and have children with to pass on to do the same thing over and over again forever. Doesn't really leave much room for enjoyment. I mean, you basically spend like probably 60 to 70% of your life staying alive and working, like spending a lot of it working and the rest of it cooking and cleaning and ironing and blah 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 and paying bills. The other 30 to 20% of your life when you're not asleep, you get to relax or leisure time. But you know, if your incentive for that is the incentives you're given a TV and a comfortable life, like, that's boring for me. I don't want to sit at home and watch TV. I'd rather travel around, and because it doesn't really give you the time, you have to work and work and work to be able to afford to travel around. There's a certain amount of time that you have to invest into your life in order to travel around. So to me, it's an unfair system. It's very hard for someone at the bottom of that system to accumulate capital, and people who are working class, for example, if they haven't had a very good upbringing because of the area they're in, there's not much money, and you know, obviously there's higher crime rates because no one's got any money. They need to rob and steal off each other and sell drugs in order to gain those finances to support themselves. Then, you know, you're not going to have as good an education onto how to get money and how to climb the ladder. It's very hard, you know. You've got to work 70 to 80 hours, slowly gaining more and more money, slowly putting yourself into an area where you'll make more money, investing into yourself to make more money, constantly over and over again. If you're spending 20 or 30 years of your life to get into a very good position, you know, that's a hell of a lot of your life that you're suffering. So that's kind of where I went against capitalism in a way. Some arguments I have for capitalism in my own head, and some things I understand why it might have been a good idea, is because when we had the Industrial Revolution, I believe that capitalism probably brought us forward in terms of science and economies. I mean, having large global competitive markets, you know, if they are competitive, means that essentially they'll be competing with each other to get the best and most efficient research data on how to make new chemicals. They'll be researching how the brain works, how all kinds of different things works, and whoever finds out, like, you know, a cure for cancer first, or a cure for this, or a new way of doing this, that, and the other, is gonna get more customers. You know, people are gonna go, holy shit, well, this company's got a patent on this which helps cancer. This motherfucking company can cure my cancer. They've just taken the market. So, you know, there are ways in which it could be useful if it was utilised in that way, and I'm not sure if it is or it isn't. And it's also a thing of capitalism can drive a hell of a lot of competition. Like, if we didn't have capitalism, we may not work as much, but we may not have produced as much. We produce a hell of a lot of waste under capitalism, I think, but there's things like, say we wanted to go for environmentalism, say we wanted to make renewable energy a thing. If the people are working 3 to 4 hours a day, with all the climate change and the environmental changes, it may take years and years and years before we actually sort the problem of environmental change out. Under capitalism, if you're given an incentive that the more you work, the more you gain for yourself, and the more you gain for your small community if you all help each other, then essentially, you know, you can make people work 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. You know, that's just a hell of a lot more productivity to put into that kind of thing. It's a bigger coordinated effort. So I can see where capitalism can have its advantages. For me, I'm pretty mixed about capitalism. I'm more against it than I am for it, but I'm not entirely against the idea, just because there are some ways I can see it could benefit us. Whilst it may not, I can understand how it could, is what I'm saying in my head. So for me, I don't know, I mean, I live in a capitalist system. It makes a lot of things quite convenient. Like, I live in a capitalist society, and most of my life has been fairly good, fairly convenient. I've worked for like 5.5 years of my life. I spent a lot of it in school and such. But I've enjoyed it, to be fair. You know, it produces some bad things in other countries, but for me, I've enjoyed my time under capitalism, so maybe it's not that bad, I don't know. But yeah, as you can tell, mixed feelings about it. But, you know, I'd rather be honest and say I can see that where it could have merits than do the expected thing and would be expected from left-wing circles and from people I know, which is, oh, capitalism is evil and there's no redeeming factors. Because, as I said, I can see where there could be redeeming factors to capitalism. Anyways, that's my review and opinions on capitalism. Thanks for watching and hope you enjoyed. If you didn't, I understand, that's fair enough.